Morning comes over War Zone C, a wild jungle area about 90 kilometers northwest of Saigon, where there is no real control. In a small open space cut out of the thick forest, 450 American soldiers are about to face a deadly situation. Around them, hidden in the trees, 2,500 Viet Cong fighters are getting ready to attack. Their commander is very sure of victory. His elite 272nd Regiment has already beaten South Vietnamese forces before, ambushed American paratroopers, and destroyed Special Forces camps. But the Viet Cong do not realize something important. Among the 450 Americans are 17 powerful 105mm howitzers and a lieutenant colonel named John Vesey, who is about to become part of military history. By later that day, 647 enemy soldiers will be dead in that clearing. That same lieutenant colonel will later rise to become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This event is known as the Battle of Firebase Gold, and for the Viet Cong, attacking it turned out to be a very serious mistake. To understand why this battle happened, we need to understand where it happened. War Zone C was the Viet Cong's backyard. This remote stretch of jungle in Thanh Ninh Province, hugging the Cambodian border, was home Operation Junction City and Firebase Gold to CUSVN, the central office for South Vietnam, the Communist Command Center controlling all military operations in the South. The American military launched Operation Junction City, the largest operation of the entire Vietnam War. The goal was simple but ambitious. Find CUSVN and destroy it. Over 30,000 troops poured into War Zone C. 22 American infantry battalions, 4 South Vietnamese battalions, 17 artillery battalions, nearly 3,000 Air Force sorties. It was the hammer meant to smash the communist command structure once and for all. But here's where the Viet Cong made their first mistake. Instead of melting into the jungle and waiting out the American offensive, the commander of communist forces in the South, General Nguyen, then chose to stand and fight. Then was a hawk. While General Vu Nguyen Giap, the legendary architect of the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu, argued that attacking American firepower head-in was suicide. Thon believed in conventional warfare. He believed his elite units could defeat the Americans in pitched battle. American helicopters began dropping soldiers into a clearing near the abandoned village of Soi Tre. The mission established Fire Support Base Gold, a platform for the 17 howitzers that would support the ongoing operation. Within hours, the base took shape. A star-shaped pattern of gun pits, foxholes around the perimeter, barbed wire, M45 quad-mount 50 caliber machine guns. It was a textbook firebase, but this firebase was different because at its center, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 77th Field Artillery, was a 44-year-old lieutenant colonel who had already earned a battlefield commission in World War II at Anzio, a man who would one day advise President Reagan on nuclear strategy. His name was John William Vesey Jr. The warning signs were there. They just didn't matter. 11 days earlier, the Viet Cong had attacked another fire base called Pre-Clock 2. It was a dress rehearsal for what was coming. At Pre-Clock, the Americans used their howitzers in direct fire mode, leveling their guns at charging enemy infantry. They killed 197 Viet Cong, while losing only 3 Americans. It should have been a lesson. Instead, Thon's forces regrouped and planned an even larger assault. On a later operation, as helicopters landed at the new fire base, command detonated explosives buried in the landing zone exploded. 3 helicopters were destroyed, 6 more damaged, 15 Americans killed, 28 wounded. It was an ambush, and it was just the beginning. The next day, patrols spotted enemy soldiers observing the firebase from the tree-line. That night, a listening post reported movement in the darkness, whispered voices, the metallic clink of weapons being readied. The 272nd Regiment was coming. A night ambush patrol sent a radio message. Enemy movement detected. Then the radio went silent. Every man on that patrol would be killed or wounded in the following hours. By this point, only 2 infantry companies, roughly 300 riflemen, plus the artillery crews, remained at Firebase Gold. The 2nd Battalion, 12th Infantry, had marched out the day before on a search and destroy mission. They were now 4 kilometers away through dense bamboo jungle. The men at Firebase Gold were on their own. The jungle erupted. More than 650 mortar rounds rained down on Firebase Gold in the first minutes of the attack. 60 millimeters, 82 millimeters. The explosions walked across the perimeter, shredding sandbags, collapsing bunkers, killing men where they stood. And then came the infantry. From the eastern treeline, waves of Viet Cong soldiers emerged, screaming, firing AK-47s and RPGs. The main assault hit Company B on the eastern perimeter. At the same time, a feint attack struck the western side to prevent reinforcement. The 272nd Regiment had come to destroy Firebase Gold, and they had brought everything. The enemy was equipped for a massacre. 50 RPG-2 rocket launchers, 30 light machine guns, thousands of AK-47s, Browning automatic rifles captured from previous battles, nearly 2,000 stick grenades. They expected to overrun the firebase within hours, and then ambush the relief column that would inevitably come. By early battle time, Company B's 1st platoon was overrun. The enemy was inside the perimeter. An Air Force forward air controller called in F-4 Phantoms loaded with napalm. They dropped their ordnance dangerously close to American positions, incinerating VC soldiers caught in the open. But the napalm wasn't enough. The VC kept coming. Company B was running out of ammunition. The captain on the ground made a desperate call. He needed beehive rounds fired directly into his own positions. The enemy was that close. A platoon from Company A that had been outside the perimeter on ambush duty made the insane decision to fight their way back through enemy lines. They charged directly through VC positions, somehow reaching the firebase alive to reinforce the defenders. The northern perimeter was breached. One of the Quad 50 machine gun positions was overrun. Its crew destroyed the weapon with thermite grenades rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The Viet Cong were now within 15 m of the artillery guns 5 m from the medical aid station where wounded Americans lay helpless. This is where the Viet Cong's gamble turned into catastrophe. Lieutenant Colonel John Vesey moved to the gun line. Around him, 14 of 17 howitzers had been damaged by mortar fire, but Vesey wasn't going to let that stop him. He personally rallied his artillerymen, organizing hasty repairs under fire. Within minutes, all but 3 guns were operational again. And then, Vesey ordered his guns to fire beehive rounds at point-blank range. The beehive round was essentially a shotgun shell for a howitzer. Inside each round were 8,000 steel flechettes that would spread in a cone of death when the shell detonated. Normally, they were fired with time fuses, but crews had no time for calculations. They disabled the timers and leveled their 105mm howitzers at the advancing enemy. They fired these massive artillery pieces like shotguns point-blank at human beings 75 m away, 50 m, sometimes as close as 15 m. Imagine 8,000 steel darts traveling at nearly 1,000 meters per second, turning a 105mm howitzer into the deadliest close-quarters weapon in military history. That morning, Vesey's artillery battalion fired 40 beehive rounds. Then they switched to high-explosive shells, still firing horizontally into the charging enemy. By the end of the battle, they had expended over 2,000 rounds of artillery at point-blank range. Veterans who survived described finding VC bodies stacked in layers in the foxholes. The flechettes had torn through rank after rank of charging soldiers. One survivor wrote that the foxholes looked like mass graves, bodies piled 3 and 4 deep. For his actions, John Vesey received the Distinguished Service Cross. His citation describes him moving through the firebase, encouraging his men and directing fire. When the perimeter was breached, he led counterattacks to restore defensive positions. For survivors, the memories never faded. A munitions officer resupplied the guns with over 2,000 artillery rounds and 41 beehive rounds. Years later, at a memorial ceremony, he said it was not something to celebrate, but something to remember, along with all soldiers lost since then. Help was finally on the way. Brigade headquarters ordered every available unit to converge on the firebase. The 2nd Battalion, 12th Infantry turned back through dense jungle toward the sounds of battle. Enemy forces tried to block their advance. Snipers harassed them. Mortar rounds fell on their column, but they kept moving, treating wounded as they went. They covered kilometers of hostile jungle under fire. At the edge of the firebase, infantry burst through the treeline and counterattacked. But the turning point came when armored units arrived. They improvised a crossing of a river by sinking an armored personnel carrier and driving tanks over it. Armor crashed through the jungle, machine guns blazing, tank guns firing canister rounds filled with steel balls. The Viet Cong assault force was cut down. An armored task force arrived just in time to relieve the defenders. The perimeter was resecured. The battle was over. The 272nd Viet Cong Regiment, one of the most elite units, had been shattered. The aftermath was staggering. American forces counted 647 Viet Cong bodies on the battlefield. Additional enemy dead were carried away. Weapons and ammunition were captured in massive quantities. American losses were far lower, with many wounded returning to duty the same day. The kill ratio exceeded 20-1. Bulldozer tanks dug mass graves. Soldiers ate meals nearby as bodies were collected. Later, senior commanders arrived and confirmed the strategy of attrition. Lure the enemy into attacking fortified firepower and destroy them. Units involved received the Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism. The battle revealed key mistakes. The Viet Cong underestimated close-range artillery firepower. They ignored prior evidence of its effectiveness. They played directly into American strategy, which relied on massed attacks being destroyed by superior firepower. Strategically, the destruction of elite Viet Cong units changed the war. Local Southern fighters were replaced by North Vietnamese regulars. The character of the insurgency shifted permanently. Later, after repeated losses in similar battles, Communist leadership changed strategy, shifting away from firebases toward attacks on cities. This shift led to a major nationwide offensive that changed the course of the war. The commander involved died later that year under uncertain circumstances, officially from natural causes, though some reports suggested combat-related injury. Lieutenant Colonel John Vesey continued rising through the ranks, eventually becoming one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States military, achieving positions few in history ever reach. The Firebase concept used in this battle was repeated thousands of times throughout the war. Each one was a deliberate challenge to enemy forces: attack and be destroyed. The Battle of Firebase Gold lasted less than a day, but its impact lasted far longer. On that day, the Viet Cong bet everything on overwhelming 450 Americans. It was a huge mistake,